Greetings, avatars, and thank you for joining us for our Release 9 Postmortem. We're here to talk about the latest release, which occurred last weekend, and is occurring again this weekend. So that's pretty cool. You get a whole 3 extra days of test time this month. And to start us off, let's kick it over to Richard. There you go, Richard.
Let's see, by the way, was that a scoop that we're going to be back up? I guess Star has already said it before, though, that we were going to be up during Dragon Con and PAX. In fact, so first of all, everybody, thank you so much again. Many of you jumped in yet again with us here this last month. I know I had a lot of fun playing alongside you. Everything from the combat tournaments, both in the arenas as well as on the Brave Coast, all the way through to the yet again rebuild of PAX Lair. I didn't get to see a play put on this time, but I did get the grand tour of the city and see some of the new mazes and things that were built, as well as I had a number of impromptu late-night gatherings, just as I would be wandering through the woods and sit down with many of you to chat and do impromptu Q&As about the game and its status. And I got to tell you, I enjoyed it thoroughly. The world is feeling more and more alive, more and more complete. In particular, I got to give a shout out to Chris and his team that is doing the combat work. That was one of the things that we had the most arguments about in-house, as well as within the player community before it was ever implemented. But we knew to have faith. We believed our faith was well placed in Chris and the combat team, and I think they came through, with 5 stars. The combat over these last 2 iterations has turned out to be much more fun, much more balanced than at least I had expected. And while we're still arguing over a few details you may hear about even during this discussion, I think foundationally we have a completely unique and extremely fun basis for combat going forward that I, for one, am very excited about. So anyway, I think it was a great release. I'm looking forward, however, to R10 already and moving back out of combat, which we've been in here for a couple of iterations as the kind of the lead, and getting some other polish and some new systems brought back onto the front burner again. But anyway, I'm very excited about R9. Over to you, Star.
Yeah, I'm going to echo Richard's thanks. The amount of feedback and community activity that we get is just incredible every time we do these, and every time I go to the forums, even when it makes me cry. I understand and see what an amazing community we have, and not just that, but what the potential of the community and what we're building, and it's just great. And the feedback we're getting about what's working and especially what's not working is great. We're absolutely listening to everything. We're balancing that, of course, with what our vision of the product is going to be, and that's always going to be a balance. We're going to listen to your feedback. We're going to balance that against what we believe the product should be, and hopefully come up with the best solution based on both those data points. So keep providing the feedback, but understand that we will balance it with what our vision of the product is.
I wouldn't say I cry when I go to the forums. I did. There were some cringe moments in the forums. Honestly, I think we did an amazing amount of good stuff this release, but this release was short, and for me, I think most people know, but for me it was an absolute blur because I took my first vacation in 3 years and went to 2 of my best friends were getting married in Colorado, and so I was out for a week, came back with bronchitis, and then the release weekend, actually, my daughter and my wife and I all got sick. So this whole release, I felt like R8 shipped, and I blinked and R9 was out the door and already over. But I did read a lot of the forum stuff. I did get to play quite a bit, and I agree with a lot of the stuff that was said in the forums that was negative. And I think there were a few people who correctly identified the 1 or 2 big changes we made that made R9 combat less enjoyable for a lot of people, and I agree completely with them. So again, to the people in the forums, and these were a couple of people who identified it were some of the biggest proponents of combat were the ones who correctly identified what thing changed.
And what was that?
Well, there are a couple things. The biggest was the changes that we made to cooldown. That was it It's not obvious why it's a problem, but it pulls your eyes out of combat way more than it should. That we added this artificial cooldown that was done at the last second. We had an internal argument about it. I was on the side of I hate cooldowns, and that's what we're going back to. We already have a penalty in terms of there's the cast time, and there's also the deal time. Adding this artificial cooldown, and you have to watch the timer go off. It forces your eyes off combat. It forces you to play this whole timed whack-a-mole game of looking away from combat continuously versus being able to instantly discard and having some instant cast spells. And I think like Isaiah, I believe, and Jerk, J-I-I-R-C, were two of the people that identified correctly some of that stuff. I think they're two of the people who are actually combat opponents in the past and have become combat proponents now. But that's one of those things you couldn't tell what was different about it to the average person, but they were two of the people that correctly identified one of the things that I thought made combat much worse. And also, again, pulled your eyes out of combat and made it feel less fun. But there are some other things. I'm sure we'll get into some from here in our discussions in terms of decisions on reagents and cast times and other things like that. So, yeah. We can get into questions. I'm sure I've seen some of those already come up in the questions. So. Do we want to get into it?
All right, Gina.
Sure thing. Our first question actually involves a feature that was new to R9, minimaps. And Silverglade would like to know if at any point the minimaps will have zoom or show party members or be customizable, like you could make notes on them. Maybe you could talk a little bit about them and their design evolution as we move forward.
We definitely recognize the need to have the ability to zoom, especially for maps of larger areas like Tartarus and Alizad and things like that. So that is a feature that we will be adding in the future. Annotations is on wish list for us. We would like to make that happen, but it's a wish list feature right now based on other priorities, but we would like to support that as well. We don't currently, for episode 1, plan on showing other data on there other than your personal position. Maybe mark where your house is might be one thing, but as far as showing where other people are, we're shying away currently from making the mini-maps be radar. And so having things like seeing where creatures are or where party members are or other NPCs or things like that is stuff we're shying away from now. That's not saying we won't do it, but our current thinking of them is it's your map, it's your personal map, it's not a radar device. But again, that's not 100% set in stone. As we play it, we might change our mind on that. That's just current.
And I tested it when it went in, and I honestly, like I said, I did not get to play as much of R9 live with lots of people in there as I wanted to, just because I was praying to the porcelain god a little bit this weekend and then taking care of the wife and baby as they did the same as we passed around a lovely flu bug. But that's one of those things I think I might have an opinion on after I play with it a bit more. Maybe over, I'm going to be at PAX, and I'll probably be playing at PAX on the machines there when there's nobody around. So maybe I'll form an opinion on zooming and annotations and how important those things are while they're there. But I do agree with it's a little bit weird to be able to see radar of where people are on the map. I don't know that fits the story. Tech-wise, it's not too challenging. But
it looks like the chat room's pretty split down the middle, too. Some are saying yes for the radar, some are saying no. So I know for me, I appreciate just having a map because I'm legendary when it comes to getting lost. But I think for the radar aspect of it, that would kind of be a little spoilery for me. And that's where I stand. Anyway, the next couple of questions actually involved something that's an old feature, housing, but we did add item limits, and people are wondering if there's going to be any additional attention paid to things like locking items down once they're placed and things like that.
Yeah, we've often talked about that the feature to say quote lock this item down, which translates to don't let me accidentally click on that item as I'm trying to do something else and move it around. So that's definitely a feature we want to add.
And if I can just come on the item limits, I'm sure people understand why we have to have them. In R7 or 8, when those mazes first started getting built, with people placing individual candles, thousands of them into the middle of their shelves in their mazes, you can understand at least why the game requires us to have a limit. And so we're trying to make sure that there's a logical balance between all the things that you want to decorate with, and the space you have to decorate, and the number of things you can place in there.
And it's not just a performance thing; it's also a design decision, because we want, other than just the sheer size of the houses, we want the size of the house and the gold value of the house to have a direct correlation to how much stuff you can put in it. And we will make every effort to increase the item limits as far as we can while maintaining performance. But the item limits are something that we will have, even if we didn't need them for performance. We would have some sort of item limits to create a progression through the houses of why the size matters.
And it'll also be something we keep tuning the numbers on and moving numbers around and changing up the rules as to like how many things you can have inside your house versus outside your house. Just because that's one of those things I think most people don't realize, is if you have items placed inside of a house, it's easier for us to not render that stuff and not load that stuff until we have to. So there's kind of two different numbers there that we look at for how many upper limits are. And that'll be something we keep changing as we move through. The thing we absolutely do not want to do is ruin people's fun in terms of like maze building or some of these sandboxy type things. So we will continue to tune that and hopefully get that to a point where everybody's happy and also everybody's performing well.
Sorry about that. Because of the natural lag between the broadcast and what's going on in the chat room, I know they're watching us about 30 to 40 seconds after what we're actually saying. There are a couple comments on the mini-maps that came through. Wrath Phoenix wanted to clarify, with a view of mini-maps being what they are, is there any chance of working skills like tracking into the map system? And then Montesquieu Payne wanted to note that if it's his mini-map, he feels like he should have the ability to make notes on it. So those are two that came in via chat room. And please, if you're not in the chat room, join us. It's shroudoftheavatar.com. You can click on chat and talk real time with us as we air.
I don't think there's anybody who was against making annotations on the map, making notes on the map. I think that's one of those that fits fiction, it fits, immersion, it's what you would do. It was purely a implementation time and where we fit it into the schedule. And again, it's not a huge thing. It's just we've got a lot of these medium-sized things to do. So we would all love to get it in, and I'm sure it will get in eventually. It's just a matter of when we get it in and what release we make.
Yep.
Terminator would like to know what the plans are of making existing existing game towns more interesting beside the main quest line that runs through it. And we saw a new city come online for R9, and so could you talk a little bit about what are we going to do to get players moving around the map, checking out these new areas?
Boy, that is an excellent question, because it was something we noticed also by the time we put up all this new space. We made in the last couple of releases, we've added a number of towns to make sure we can give people enough places to go have housing. We started adding arenas and basements and things for people to go not only decorate but have these combats in. We made the PvP combat arenas, and then we started adding also big new places like Arteris, which was obviously one of the, hopefully I think is going to be the largest city map that we make, and we don't think we need to make anything really much, if much bigger at all, if that big again. And so the net result of that is, of course, you take all the players and you spread them out in that, and suddenly not only does the world feel unpopulated, but we didn't do a good job of kind of leading people to those areas so they A, would find them, and B, find them as a group and find activity going on there to where they're interesting to explore. And so we are now kind of changing a number of things. One of the things we're doing is we're going to reduce some of those extra instances of towns that we had created just to provide people more space to find a house, because we'll be adding more with the new kind of official cities. We don't need to have a lot of those duplicated around Hidden Vale. Combining with that, we're actually going to now start putting purposeful activities that take people on a journey from the starting areas into the places we want them to explore, and I think that they'll both enjoy and/or that we want tested. And that way, I think we have a good plan now, I think, for giving people both knowledge and cause to explore the areas as we bring them online.
In terms of the long-term game, we'll have lots of ways that we'll be moving people around. Some of it will involve, like, there'll be trainers that will spread around the world, and there may only be like a few master trainers in the world, and we will spread people around. So right now, of course, you can just train any skill by going plus, 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 plus. In the actual long-term game, we will be spreading some of those people around, and there may also be, the trainer may be here, but there may be something you have to do over here that will actually get you access, so the trainer will help you. Even though the trainer may be in the big town, he may ask you to do something somewhere else. There will also be the just proximity to key areas that will move people around in terms of resources and things to mine, and markets and other things. There'll be lots of things that will keep people moving around. I wanted to answer one that was in here just while we have everybody's attention early in the talk about DragonCon and PAX, just because that has come up multiple times, and remind people that we will be at, Star and Richard are going to be at DragonCon, and myself and B and Finn will be at PAX, sometimes with a robotic version of Richard. We're actually taking the robot to PAX, and when Richard is not busy at DragonCon, he will be on the robot at PAX, or Star will be on the robot at PAX. So we're going to be trying to do some crazy stuff with robot interviews and other new things. Do you want to say, I know you guys are doing lots of talks at DragonCon. Do you want to talk to some people there about it? Because that's what they actually have.
Yeah, sure. So Richard and I are giving multiple talks on video games and space tourism. So I'm giving the opening talk for the video game track, where I'm going to be talking about tech trends, projecting tech trends for video games over the next 10 years. We're going to do a Shroud presentation. We're going to do a Shroud deep dive. We are going to, I mean, we have a crazy schedule. Richard and I are on multiple panels. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities to see Richard and I speak at DragonCon. So if you just, all you have to do is go look in the program, search for one of us, and you'll be able to see all of those. They're also, most of them are listed on our upcoming event page on the website. All those times are in Eastern, and so you can check out that as well. We're also going to be doing, we're giving away access to Release 10 for those of you who are not yet backers. We'll be giving, if you find us and come chat with us either at PAX or DragonCon, we'll let you sign up for access to Release 10 weekend. And also, if you find us at either of those conventions, you may be able to receive one of the trade show versions of the challenge coin.
I will be doing no talks, by the way. I will be standing in the booth. I will be the booth thing. But I will, if anybody wants to stop by PAX and say hi, I will talk as long as I can to you, and we'll let you pick my brain on any game design, combat stuff, any tech stuff, whatever you want.
Yep.
And you're feel free to stop by and buy me a beer afterwards, too.
Yes. Speaking of beer, well, it's not really a reagent, but we did have several questions come up about the use of reagents and how they factored into combat this release. Did you want to, you said a little earlier you were going to talk about that, so here's your chance.
and the gloves come out.
Yeah, so Chris and I, we would, Yeah, so let's open the kimono here, as you will. We went back and forth quite a few times leading up to Release 9 about how we wanted to handle reagents or not. And so it is still something very much that we are trying various solutions, some of which we know are challenging for some people, or some people like them a lot, and we know it's both. You know, we get a lot of opinions about whether it's an absolute requirement, it has a effect on the spell or not, or any variation of those two. So the one thing I will tell you is expect variation and expect us to try out various scenarios with that over the next several releases of how it will work. That is the one thing I will tell you. And I'm going to let Chris talk about one of the main reasons why we are going with it, or why we went with the current solution where you are not prevented from casting a spell when you don't have those reagents currently, but still something that we debate quite often. So
I know what my opinion is. There's no debate in my mind.
So the long-term solution is still up for big debate. For R9, we pulled it as required for it, just because we didn't want to. Again, there are so many people who did not read notes this time. If we'd required it, I think it would have just resulted in a lot of frustration for people. In terms of the full balance of things, until we have we're kind of 70% done with combat in general, and so we have penalties in there for archers and if they have to shoot arrows. We have penalties in there now for reagents, and if they have to use reagents, we don't have the armor damage and weapon damage side of things. It was a tough decision as to whether or not to balance it. So for this release, most people probably saw that for this release, we only did tier 3, 4, and 5 spells. Things that were in the 3rd, 4th, and 5th rows, kind of the more powerful spells. We had them, if you did not have a reagent, we used double mana. I think we had a long cooldown, and then we also had a longer, maybe a higher fizzle chance. I forget what we actually ended up with the final thing. But we basically tried to penalize you to the point that if you were using those spells, you would not be effective, but you could use them without reagents. If you had reagents, it's simply used the reagent. In the long term, Richard and I will continue to debate.
No, actually, you've actually given it enough qualifiers there that you're making me pretty happy. But because the practicality is really as much of it, to me, is the important thing. And somebody I noticed in chat, people were also just asking about the availability of arrows. And since you mentioned, that archers now had their pain that they had to go through to fight, people were commenting like that it was actually a bit too hard. People, don't worry. We understand when we throw these things in there for you guys to play with, that very commonly they're either going to be overpriced or underpriced or easily accessible or impossible to get. And of course, we'll be balancing those things to where we'll make it the appropriate level of difficulty to track those things down. Ultimately for reagents, instead of just going to the store and buying them, we're hoping the player economy ultimately takes that over. So all of the harvesting and discovery, you'll go out and find your black pearls in oyster beds. You'll go dig up your mandrake root. You'll go do things of that nature. And if you don't go do it personally, you'll find part of the player economy, a group of people that have gone to do that to build the stock that you'll find in the shops. That's still now a couple releases away, and so in the meantime, we're just going to put it in the shop at a price and hope that it works.
And also, just because I know there's going to be multiple threads on this, I see Tech is expressing some strong opinions here. I've seen Baron Droxus, I forget his full name. I've seen him express some strong opinions. Just so everybody knows, all the things that are on the table could be just, it always requires reagent, you flat out cannot cast. It could be kind of what we did for this one, but with possibly more penalties or less penalties. You can cast it, you will not be competitive if you're not using reagents. It could be when you cast, there's a percentage chance that you use the reagent. I know Richard hates that one. That actually is my preference in terms, just so people know why. That's my preference because then we can have rare reagents, but it gives us a very clear way to balance the economy of spells. If we know we can balance spells, whereas if it is a full reagent, then we there will be some spells that you end up having to, like, I have to just carry like 1,000 of these things because I want to go cast it. If we have it as a, Light Heal has a 5% chance to use the Ginseng, and Greater Heal has a 50% chance of using it, something like that. It helps us balance those things that we can't avoid fractional uses of things. But if players want to start, I'm sure Tech and others will go start a thread on this, express their opinions. I feel this is kind of one of those religious debates, though. I know it is between Richard and Star and I that we all have slightly different opinions, and honestly, I think this is more between Richard and I, and Star just tries to mediate and keep us from killing each other.
Yeah.
But we'll come up with the right decision long term that makes the game most fun without breaking immersion. Reagents are a part of the game. It's kind of the bottom line, and we just have to figure out exactly how they fit in. And we want to also use them we want to use them to help drive the economy, the player economy as well.
And don't forget, it was a good thing we let Crisco do his glyph-based combat system in the first place. I think it turned out really great. I'm sure there still might be some dissenters, but I'm personally, I think we're completely unified internally that it's the right direction to go. And so, when we have the people responsible for implementation have a passionate idea on the way they want to take it, we generally want to run that way first because they're the people closest to it who've been studying it the hardest. And if it's a new idea, new ideas are often great ideas, but sometimes new ideas don't work. And so fear not if the new ideas don't work. The fallback is to do it the traditional Ultima type way that you guys are familiar with, which is reagents are required for magic spells. So we'll load it with these other things. We're going to try to make a balance akin to the way the combat guys, combat experts believe will run the best. But fear not, they'll either prove themselves right or we'll back off to a more conservative traditional perspective.
And as to answer something that Tech said in chat, he was saying that mages should always be more powerful, but they have to use reagents. We pretty much agree with that. The cost of playing a mage is you do get to be the big cannon, the crystal or glass cannon or whatever type of thing, where you can burn through a lot of financial resources to cast big spells and generate lots of power. We want to find a way to balance that. So the only thing you can do in the game is if you want to be effective, you have to play a mage. We're trying to come up with a good balance for that. So we're not forcing everybody to be a mage, or you're worthless. So we will come up with something, and nothing is off the table. Richard's involved with the project, and I think he just expressed his opinion as he wants Ultima. So we'll see where we end up.
I mean, the bottom line is we understand the ranged uses ammo balance issue, and however we get to that, we will get to a point where magic is balanced in some way, which is as a ranged thing with the equivalent of ammo. How that is expressed, we're still working out, and we're going to try some experiments. And also understand too, because I saw a lot of posts in the threads about wands and staves and how it seems overpowered or unrealistic, and it was just this unlimited ranged weapon, and that's just a temporary state of affairs. Wands and staves are going to be charged, so they can either buy wands and staves that are charged up, with the little fire, of the different damage types. So they'll be like fire wands and lightning wands and ice wands and things like that, and they will have a limited number of charges. And you can either keep buying those charged wands, or in the alchemy tree you'll be able to actually charge those wands. So carpenters will be probably the ones making the wands, and then the alchemists will be the ones that will be charging them. So that's, again, trying to create that loop between. So they're not going to be these unlimited ranged weapons that everyone will use. They will have a limit balance, just like arrows are balanced with bows. So we get it.
And I want to thank you guys for touching on that, because and Royal Marshal Lord Long actually brought it up in the questions. He mentioned that he's noticed there's a lot of polarity in the feedback. We get the people who really love what we're doing versus people that really, are just freaking out. And that's all good feedback for us. It allows us at this very early stage in development to try things and to really push on these systems in a way, and that is going to make this game absolutely fantastic. And it allows us to do that with immediate feedback. I can't even imagine anymore developing a game any other way. It's just been incredible. So thank you for the feedback, good and bad. We do listen, and we do act on it.
And on the feedback from people, I did want to jump in and say that that's one of those things we always have to remember, that when we read some of these absolute freak-out post and forum things that just seem totally 100% trolling, the thing we try to keep in mind is we know those people are super passionate. They would not be there, they would not be saying those things if they were not super passionate. So we always, that's whenever we get frustrated, that's one of the things I try to remember is this guy is super passionate, sometimes a little too passionate. Not naming names, just there's a few of you guys out there, but we appreciate that you guys are passionate about it and really want the game that much, and I was that excited about trying to make it better. But anyways, you can just turn down the passion a tiny bit and turn up the construction a little bit. I think some of those posts would be much better.
Yes, please. The more specific you are with your feedback, the more helpful it is for us. It really is. Their next question comes from Jerk, and it always feels a little weird saying his name. He commented on the use of slugs and how that's kind of taken a beating this release. And so what is the current thinking on slugs, and what did you learn from this release about their use and what ultimately they will be?
So we're going to give everyone a salt shaker, and they're going to be able to take that salt shaker and pour it on the slugs. I'll let Chris give a serious answer.
Didn't they say that children who grow up torturing animals end up growing up to be psychopaths or something like that? More probably.
No idea what you're talking about.
I burned ants and put salt on slugs. Just so you know. I don't know what that means. Anyways, to the actual topic. So the one thing to keep in mind is we're giving you, for this release, we basically made everybody what we expect it to be at for level 10. Richard has had some concerns as well for things like in terms of stuff like not giving you enough points to properly design multiple play styles. That's one of those things hopefully we'll deal with in release 10. We'll be giving you more points. But also one thing to keep in mind is we're giving you we're setting a minimum deck size of 20, so most people build up to exactly 20. 20 is probably about what you will be at in terms of cards at level, I think that's what it's right now set for level 10. When you are level 1, you're going to have fewer than that. And every about 10 levels, there'll be a bump in the size of the minimum card you can have, minimum glyphs you can have in your deck. And that will continue up to when you get to, I think at level 30 or 40 is where it should be at 30 glyphs in your deck for the minimum size. So having 6 slugs feels a little more painful at 20 cards than it does at 30 cards. It dilutes the number of slugs in there. You will have more glyphs in your deck by the time you hit a higher level. So that's one thing that will dilute the glyphs. The bigger thing for this release was the current design is that if you are in the heaviest plate mail and you have all these skills to minimize the pain of having that heavy armor on, that you should only have 6 slugs in your deck. So that was not how it worked for this one. I think it actually ended up being that you had about 12 in there. Again, we changed that in the last few days, and the last week or so was just a blur for me, but I believe it was 12. So I believe it was extra painful for people trying to wear heavy armor. I think people with blades and in heavy armor were still super effective this time. I think as the tournament showed in the PvP stuff, which is part of why we added PvP, is we can see how things are playing out. So it obviously was not crippling. One of the other things that made slugs extra painful, was the thing I mentioned before, was in the previous release, discarding a slug, you could do it and it happened instantly. In this one, you hit it and it reset the cooldown timer. So you throw away a slug that came into your hand, and when you discarded it, it basically locked you from doing anything else for a full second, which not only is frustrating that you want to do something else right then, but it also makes you take your eyes off combat an additional time instead of just being corner of my eye, see it and take it. Now it's like you take it and you're like watching the timer, cooldown timer go while you wait to do something else. So
Hey,
don't hate on Spence for this release. Try them in Arcane and see how they feel.
let me jump in and answer a question that Sir Hemrick threw in that is kind of related to this topic. He said he's relatively new to the game and combat, and we just wanted to know kind of why we've gone in this direction of kind of randomly bringing up the glyphs of the skills. And I think that deserves a comment, because I think that's one of the big wins of this new method that was being reached for, that we debated whether this would work internally, but I think it has worked out far better, at least than I had predicted. And what that is that we wanted to get away from the traditional MMO and, for that matter, RPG games usual type of combat, where everything you do is to min-max your damage over time, and maximize your damage over time and minimize the damage you receive over time. And what that often has come down to in role-playing games is that you end up standing toe-to-toe with your opponents, and you know exactly what you're going to be doing. You know exactly that it's I have enough mana for 3 buffs, or I do my buffs before I enter the combat even. I then have enough for 3 big fireballs or whatever your big spells are before you have to fall back onto the next most powerful thing you have, and then you have a rhythm of other skills you can execute in sequence. And so it's something you can almost macro to do your maximum damage over time, because of the way that it had worked. And if you think of first of all, real combat, like I used to be a tournament fencer back in college, and the reason why you before you go fight a real battle, you drill the moves and techniques that you want to remember when you're in that battle. That doesn't mean that you will remember them. That means you're going to try to remember them. And this concept of deck building, first of all, had already been proven out in asynchronous games, in turn-based games, to show that allowing you to build out this deck of a philosophical strategy in a deck that is pulled from makes for very subtle, very complex strategies that have a lot of nuance to them. And because, to me, there was also a good fictionalization for it, in the sense of, before we send the troops out to go do battle in Kuwait, they would do desert exercises so that how to deal with a desert environment was fresh in their minds. So when they get into a real-time issue, hopefully they'll think of those tactics versus the forest fighting tactics. And while to me at least, the debate was, will something that we're kind of borrowing from a turn-based history, will that apply? Can we bring that forward into a real-time combat and have it work? That was the part that I was actually really worried about. However, I think it's working out great. I myself find it already in the mode of thinking hard about exactly how many skills do I put into my queue of things that might show up, so that I can adjust the probabilities that I will think of that glyph and have it available to me when it pulls up on screen. And it also makes every combat unique. There's no more macroing, 2 or 3 cycle commands based upon their cooldown rates. And so I think it's done a great job to make you pay attention both to what's happening in real time, as well as to take a real sense of subtlety or a real skill to the fine-tuning of the deck you put together.
Another thing that it's done is it's the way we plan things is you will pretty much be able to, at like level maybe 10 to 20, you will be able to put together the same deck that a player, any level player can, because they may have more total skills than you, but there's only so many effective ones you can put together in a single set, in a single deck. So having the best 30 cards is what you're looking for. That guy may be able to put together a deck of like 1,000 cards, but that doesn't make it a better set. You kind of want the effective, these work together, these all play together well. So that's one of those other things, and that's part of the some of this is pulling from chat as I'm doing chat and trying to listen to Richard as well. But that's part of the whole pulling down the power curve as well, is At level 20, you may be able to get the same effectiveness in combat, or very close to the same effectiveness in combat as somebody much higher than you, which is part of what we're going for. Is it's not all level grind and level based. It's all very flat in terms of that. It's really what you're doing is you're expanding your possibilities in different play styles and different ways you can play, which can actually add more power, because that's one thing we will be trying to do for Arcane is we're going to add an interface you can more quickly switch between different decks during combat, so that you can change up in combat. Anyway, just throwing that in. I've distracted by chat. Sorry.
Our next two questions, one actually came in chat from Jackknife. The other was posted on the website from Evans. They wanted to know a little bit about the user interface and user experience, the UI for deck swapping, customization of the UI, that kind of thing.
Well, take those separately too, if we can. I saw those go by as well. So I'll let you do the deck one and deck building and skills one, Chris. But let me pass the other one over to you, Star. A lot of people here were just asking about scaling of UI and just arranging your windows how you want on screen. What do we think we'll be getting to, and how soon, for giving people a little more control over some of that?
I mean, it's a great question. We definitely want to provide as much flexibility in the UI as we can. There's, in some cases, there's kind of a minimum size that needs, either a minimum aspect ratio or a minimum width or a minimum height that needs to be maintained in order to maintain the visibility inside that without having to scroll. Like skill trees are an example of that. However, we do want to, as people give more feedback, we'll try and provide more flexibility. That's the kind of stuff right now we're pushing to closer to the end of the schedule. But, if that becomes a bigger and bigger need, and we perceive that that's a barrier to play for more and more people, we might pull those things in early. But we understand that. I know that Richard has expressed the desire to be able to scale UI elements, and there are some performance implications with those kinds of things, but they're something we understand and we hear.
Yeah, and continuing on that, this is part of the, I think this is a little bit more the growing pains of people seeing a game in development. What we're trying to do is get everything to a functional and not too painful level as quickly as possible, so we can get things into your hand. Because a lot of times it's the UI. I think people who are outside of game development don't realize the UI time on a game can frequently be 30 or 40% of the total tech development time. Doing UI is a lot of work. If you go through and count, just how many buttons, how many different scroll lists, how many different elements there are in these things, they're huge, and they have to pull. It's not just that time, but you have to pull data from all over the game. So a lot of these things, and I think those are some things that we got it to a point where it is functional. It's not hideous. It is usable. And as we get later in development, whichever things become the most painful early on and become obviously need update, we'll be updating those things and changing them out. I think we've already done that with a lot of different elements. Like the front end, the character creation stuff. That's one of those where I think we all looked at and said, that's embarrassing to the game. We need to go and update how the character creation is done and change out all that stuff and make that a more pleasant experience. But anyways, I think that those things will be prioritized and improved as needed, as they feel like they're the lowest, the most painful element of the game. I think right now they are not. There's still a lot more things we need to expose to people. There's a lot more bad UI we need to do before we can start fixing the old bad UI. So once we get all the new bad UI, then we can go back and start polishing the most painful parts.
Okay. Next.
Our next question comes from Carlin, the Druid Archer. He made his name even longer for me. We've seen a lot of focus in the last few releases, and many of us are itching to see some non-combat mechanics. Without spoiling any plot, can you give us a rundown of some of the mechanics you're planning to put in place for storyline aspects of the game? Not necessarily story spoilers, but how we're going to be doling out the story in game, the mechanics behind that?
Well, it's important to point out that unlike games with a quest log, where everything precisely fits a formula, we're not doing that. So a quest could, in theory, be virtually anything. If in games with a quest log, it always has to fit the rhythm of the quest has a name. The quest has an objective which fits into a certain set of categories. Destroy or kill something, or acquire something, or reach a certain point, or whatever few they have programmed, and then perhaps return it or check it as done. In our case, we're doing something with a lot more gray area and subtlety to it. So the method of hearing about it will predominantly be conversation, but that doesn't necessarily have to be the case. You could walk around in the world and find a sign that says, build a circle of stones around me and special things will happen. And lo and behold, that just might work, because again, for us, a quest is literally just a custom piece of code to test for conditions and fire off an event. And so that allows us to do things like we did in some of the earlier Ultimas, where we can make a quest where playing a particular piece of music on a particular instrument at a particular place might open a secret door or operate anything else in the game. So it's I'm hopeful that you'll see a broad diversity of methods of opening and closing those quest cycles. If I've got something else here too, Gene, if I can, that I told somebody I was going to pop in here and answer a question from Wrath Phoenix. He was asking about tailoring, exactly. And so, the technology we have in-house does allow for coloring of clothes, and we do plan to have dyes. Exactly how many that is yet to be determined, as far as I know. I don't think we've settled. I started making some of the dye recipes myself, however, the other day, as it fell out of food, since a lot of the materials you make dyes out of are often the same ingredients you use to make food. But I don't think we're going to make it just a completely open color wheel, in the sense of I don't think we really want to. We may be restricting people out of making neon colors or things that we think are inappropriate for the ambiance of a medieval-themed game. Star, you want to jump in?
Yeah, but I think it's actually, for us, it's less about, although, yes, those things would be potentially immersion breaking, but you could argue away and say, oh, it's magic and magic influenced and blah. But it's really more about the economy. And by having, a quote set number of colors, and that set number can expand over time, and that set number could be n, and n as a variable of it doesn't have to be a fixed number, but by having it be a specific number of them, we can say some dyes are rarer than others, and based on the rarity of the ingredients involved, and that helps with the economy. And it is very important to have that concept of rarity in as many things as we can, whether it's ingredients, final products, or combinations of the two. And so it's really more about the economy and why we want to limit those colors because if everyone had a color wheel, then there would be that basically would remove the value of dye as a commodity. And we could do that, but that would be leaving something on the table which we actually think traditionally is actually a very valuable commodity and very important to the economy.
I was going to try to screen share my dye recipes, but I've got so many windows open on my computer, I can't find them. But literally, to do dyes, to do all the food and all the dyes, I went and did a bunch of research, as is one of my favorite things to go do to do design, on actually how you make natural dyes. With often includes fruits or plant parts of various kinds of plants, and either salt and/or vinegar. In addition to sometimes water, as a setting agents to set those dyes in. So, and which means then that I had to find or invent enough raw materials you can forage for in the game to be the basis of those dyes, and then make sure that they were differentiated well enough. So anyway, it was a fun but detailed project. So dyeing clothes will be nice and detailed.
And I do want to take a chance to plug that next Thursday we are having a fireside chat on, it's called From Nature to Nutrition, isn't it, Lord British?
Indeed it is.
And so make sure, if you're interested in that kind of stuff, to join us for that, because it's going to be cool. I'm actually really interested in natural colorings, and of course I love cooking, so this is going to be an exciting one for me too.
And also, just so people know, Richard has been repeatedly asking me to expose the spreadsheets and the tools so that he can add recipes himself directly into the game, which leaves Beezus on the forums or in-game, weeping in tears on his desk with his head down to think that Richard would be adding, and he would be adding multiple in parallel and not having monitored in terms of trying to figure out balance and how things fit together. But Richard, you'll be happy to know that with the new system set up and the simpler way of entering things, B said that when you get here next week, I think you're down, is it next Friday? That he will sit with you, and he says he can enter 200 recipes in a day if you have the recipes for him, and that he will go through them. So
I've got him. I've got 200. We'll do it in a day.
That's what you should expect. So.
Okay.
All right. Our next question comes again from Carlin, the druid archer, and it's back to combat. He wants to know, in any iteration of combat, are there going to be tactical effects on things like cover, higher ground? Are any of those things going to come into play as we continue to polish the system?
Yes. Well, cover specifically and positioning will continue to be iterated on. So, for instance, right now the only positioning we really have is if you attack from behind, you get a bonus. But if you go find like my skills overview or combat mega post, you'll see some of the shield effects that are about creating basically shield walls, or Tetsuda, which is kind of a turtle formation, and those are all about relative position between you and your teammates, increasing defense values. So there'll be that positional information that will factor into combat. Cover will work similar to the way it did in Tabula Rasa, where it's line of sight calculations and also how much of I can see of you or you can see of me will affect both the hit and damage values. So getting behind cover will have an obvious benefit to it. Elevation is not one we've discussed, although that's quite interesting. Although anyone who has played in the arena and been sniped by someone in the balcony can tell you, I'm not sure they need much more advantage than the pure position, the actual ability to go stand up there and zap you when you're down in the arena and you have to run up the stairs. So, but that's an interesting concept that could be possible of relative height values having some effect with the combat rolls.
And also, just so people know, one thing that frustrated me was I see someone casting a spell at me. As an archer, particularly, I'm in a doorway or something. I step so that they can't see me, or I step behind a column. Like in the arena, I'll be up on the upper level because I was trying to play an archer a lot, purely so that Carlin Archer would have a better experience because I worry about him and his bows. But I would step behind the column, and then a second after I step behind the column, here comes a spell shooting me through the column. I think anybody who played in the arena probably saw that type of experience. So we just added today the breaking line of sight will actually interrupt somebody's spell. So if someone has a line of sight on you and they start casting a spell and you lose line of sight during spell cast, it will interrupt their spell. The same thing with moving out of range for people who've had that same type of experience. If you shoot someone and by the time the spell gets off, they're way out of range. That will also break.
And just to throw out some real-time design discussion, to clarify or to deepen something that Star said about how we did this in Tabula Rasa, we actually did something I think very simple, and I want to just make sure that Chris is accommodating this in when he describes things like line of sight. Most games, or the simplest of games, first-person shooters have become quite sophisticated now by being able to lean out and shoot around a corner. But most role-playing games, when they do line of sight, it's very simple. It's just from the core node of one character to the core node of the other one, center chest to center chest, and if that's interrupted, then you don't have line of sight. What we did in Tabula Rasa is we said, what really matters is you're generally shooting from somewhere near your eyes. Whether it's with a gun or a sword or whatever else, it's coming from really the uppermost portion. The attack is coming focused from your shoulders to head area towards your opponent. And what we did for cover is we basically said we're going to run not just one ray, we're going to run two. And one ray went to the upper half of that person's body. And that upper half of their body was meant to show, are they standing behind a sandbag wall or something, or a stone wall, to where half their body at least is showing. And we'd run another ray trace or line from, again, their shooting zone, where they're coming from, again up near their face, down towards their feet. And by doing those two, it meant we could detect if they're standing out in plain sight, then both those rays would reach your opponent. If they were standing behind something obstructing, like a stone wall of half height, half a player's height, a meter high or so, then you would know that they at least had some advantage in cover. And if neither ray worked, then we'd know that they were completely out of sight. So anyway, as Chris goes through the calculations that should break your ability to target them, maybe if you just see their feet, that's still good enough for magic. But anyway, we'll roll these kinds of concepts of exposure into the system.
And just to correct Richard, since I actually coded that on Tabula Rasa, that was we did 5. I think we ended up with 5 different bones, and we actually used the bones in your transform. So it would be your head. I forget if we ended up with elbows or shoulders and knees. So basically, how much of your body showed, but it was actually based on your model. So we will do something along those lines in terms of figuring out cover. The thing I know we're going to do it for is for things like explosions, like the fireball. If you take partial coverage, you can actually take partial damage and those type things.
And another part I'm very excited about too is not only when it works from a PvP standpoint, but also when our skeleton archers or our elf archers understand that this is working. It means that when they're being hit, they should ultimately in the long run become smart enough to go, I don't want to stand here in full view of my opponent. And likewise, if I don't have full view of them that I'm shooting at, I might want to move to another position where I can get a more advantageous line of sight on them. So I think that will immediately, work very well in Tabula Rasa. It made the AI seem much more intelligent, both from a defensive standpoint and an offensive standpoint. And I hope we get there with this game too.
We just have a few more minutes left to the Hangout, and I was thinking it might be a good time to talk a little bit about what's in store for R10. The Release 9 weekend that's coming up is going to be basically an extension of this release. Nothing is being wiped, and so your houses are still there to just basically be able to log into the game again. But what's in store for the players come R10?
Yeah, so I made a post earlier today, and Chris and Richard will probably be making posts later this evening or tomorrow with their impressions. But as we've been broadcasting to you guys for several months now, every quarter or so we will be doing a polish pass. So that's the main goal of Release 10, is to increase stability and performance and just polish things. However, there will be some new content. So the castle areas in Arteris will be finished out, so that'll make that city complete. We are going to make some slight modifications to the PvP arenas so that we can support spectators. So we're going to make those the upper levels of the arena for spectators and just confine combat to the bottom floor. We're also going to introduce this concept of challenge levels, which is a concept Chris introduced, which is actually shifting off of PvP and more towards PvE in at least this first challenge level. We might have different types of challenge levels, but just basically have a series of challenges of ever-increasing difficulty of you fighting the AI. Also a concept that Richard came up with, which is this idea of a quote default deck that is just populated directly based on how you are putting or removing points in your skills. So as you add points, we automatically build and equip a deck for you. So those are just some of the highlights, but you can read more. I made that post about, I guess, an hour ago. I can go check that out. Dark Stars released 9 impressions and released 10 full plan. And then, as we mentioned, we're reopening Release 9 this weekend, starting at 10:30 on Friday, going through 10:30 on Tuesday. So it's actually even longer than the original Release 9 weekend. So 1 extra day. We changed the team names to PAX and Dragon Con. So pick your favorite convention and fight for that team, and we'll announce who won. Oh, by the way, for Release 9, Chaos won. 51 to 40 matches. So there were more Chaos PvP team wins than there were Virtue wins. So thank you, all of you chaotic players.
I blame Richard for showing up and distracting people. Also, I wanted to mention for Release 9, the re-release, all we did was we changed the team names to PAX and Dragon Con, just because that was a absolutely trivial thing. The only other thing we did was we fixed a few blocking bugs. There was one where you could get into a broken state. If you're one of the 4 individuals, I think there were about 20 of them, that were in that broken state where you just can't even log in. You will need to delete your character and restart him, but that should now be fixed going forward, and that was an odd issue that we were getting into that has now been addressed. We did not want to push a server fix that would clean your character for you. We could have done that, but it was just deemed a little too risky for this type of release without significant QA on it. So.
Yeah. And please, if you're going to be at either PAX Prime or Dragon Con, come see us. If you're not going to be at those 2, please log in, play the game over the weekend, because the more people we have in playing the game, the more things that players who are experiencing for the first time at the show will get to see. So help us out.
And as we mentioned for R10, we will be doing more things to try to get more people gathered in areas. We actually had more people in this release. It just felt a little emptier because how spread out people are getting as we add more content to one. We will be doing more in R10 to get people together and doing things together and making more areas feel vibrant rather than completely just spreading out and having, a half dozen people in 40 different places. We're going to try to get more people gathered in there. So.
Yep.
And come see me at PAX.
So this weekend the party is at Arteris, right? For PAX. All right. Thank you so much, community, for joining us. We have another awesome Hangout of Fireside Chat next week scheduled for Thursday, and, of course, our monthly Pen of the Avatar for Tuesday. So next week you get 2 Hangouts. Looking forward to seeing you guys there. Looking forward to seeing you in-game this weekend. And thanks for joining us. See ya.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.